Sundus and her 8-month fully formed unborn baby are, of course, only two of the hundreds of thousands of people who have been murdered by Benjamin Netanyahu and his murder gang in Tel Aviv. I highlight them for two reasons. First of all, because it's only just happened in the last few hours, and secondly, because it was in the West Bank. The October 7th incursion, of course, came from Gaza. It had nothing to do with the West Bank. Hamas don't rule the West Bank, and Sundus and her unborn baby definitely had nothing to do with Hamas. And therefore, underscored in this little mass murder in the Holy Land is the obvious point. This did not begin on October the 7th, and this is not about Hamas. There is not an Israel-Hamas war. The media are lying to you about that. They have been lying to you about it all along. I ask you never to forget that the President of the United States of America, Joe Biden, claimed on air, in public, to the world, that he had just seen pictures of beheaded babies on October the 7th. It was a gigantic lie, a bright, shining lie. The propagandists who pervade it across the world were lying. The mass media is still lying to you all day, every day. They don't even report, not one single outlet in the mass media in the world has reported what I've just told you about Sundus and her 8-month-old unborn baby. Not one person in the power structures of Western countries will talk about it. They are all engaged in a gigantic lie. This much you know. What you don't know, and I don't know, is why. Why is the entire world political system in the West, why is it so bent and twisted in defense of a genocidal country of 8 million people, millions of whom are third-class citizens with no rights of any kind at all? I've known apartheid, Mr. Elon Musk. I was in apartheid South Africa, undercover for the African National Congress. I gave my blood on the floor of the police station in Gugulethu Township in Cape Town, South Africa. I mean, I literally gave my blood. And I was accompanied every step of the way and under the leadership of brave Jewish fighters against apartheid in South Africa. So don't tell me that Jews are in any way necessarily supporters of apartheid. Because I give you Joe Slovo, I give you Ruth First, I give you Albie Sachs, I give you Dennis Goldberg, I give you Ronnie Casserols, I give you Max Coleman, I give you Audrey Coleman, I give you their sons who drove me around. This genocidal apartheid state in Israel is exactly the same in every particular, except it is worse than the apartheid system in South Africa. And I'm not going to stand by while Donald Trump and Elon Musk begin what can only be described as a genocidal attempt to bring down the Republic of South Africa because some guy sang a song about killing farmers, killing Boers. What does that have to do with the government of South Africa? What does that have to do with Cyril Ramaphosa? What does that have to do with the South African coalition government? I'll tell you what it has to do. South Africa was the country that brought the case of genocide against Israel in front of the International criminal court in front of the International Court of Justice, the highest court in the world. That's why they've launched a war of words at the moment against South Africa. And only that. It's not because they care about the Boers. Let me be clear. I'm against killing farmers. I'm against killing Boers. I'm against killing whites, just as much as I was against killing blacks under apartheid in South Africa. Can the critics of South Africa today say the same? Somebody asked me, how do you feel about people killing white farmers in South Africa? I said exactly the same way that I cared and felt about the killing of the black children at Sharpeville, about the killing of the black children in Soweto. How about you? I asked, and answer came there, none. Because they, of course, said nothing against apartheid until it was time for apartheid to be ditched. The United States of America took Nelson Mandela off the international terrorist list in 2008. 18 years after his release from Pollsmoor Prison, later Pollsmoor Hospital. The British and American governments supported apartheid right up until the bitter end. So the last people in the world entitled to talk about South Africa and racism are the British and American governments. Now that I've got that off my chest, let me turn to Ukraine. I've just read in the last few minutes, I was reading it while I was waiting to come on air, about a split which has occurred inside the American government over how they're going to actually implement the election promise that Donald Trump made, that he was going to bring an end to the war in Ukraine. It's the only basis on which people like me preferred him over Kamala Harris. But when does it start, President Trump? Apparently, you spoke with President Putin today. Did you tell him that your special appointee to Ukraine and Russia to bring about the end of the war, did you tell him that he is pushing for the resignation of President Putin? Good luck with that. Do any of you seriously think that the one who's going to resign is President Putin? Seriously? He's the most popular Russian leader since Joseph Stalin in the Second World War. Putin has the support of more than 80% of the Russian people. And the Russians have paid a gigantic price in blood and treasure to liberate their co-religionists, to liberate their Russian compatriots in the eastern part of Ukraine from 10 years of violence and mass murder against them. 14,000 Eastern Ukrainians, Russian people in Eastern Ukraine, trapped there by the vagaries of boundaries in the Soviet period, were systematically reduced. Their children murdered. Their old people slaughtered in their homes. Their trade unionists in Odessa burned to death deliberately in a burning trade union building. Do you think Russia has done all this? Do you think Russia has expended all this in international ostracism, sanctions, treasure, in the hundreds of billions, and the blood of so many of their soldiers and civilians? Do you think Russia's done all this so that Donald Trump can demand the resignation of Vladimir Putin as a condition of bringing about a ceasefire? Let me tell you, if that's your demand, there will be no ceasefire in Ukraine. The war will continue until the Russian armed forces are in the center of Kiev, appointing a government of their own. You said you were the anti-war leader, Donald Trump. You said you'd bring about an end to the war in Gaza, only to declare that you were now the ruler of Gaza and the Palestinians now had to get out and never come back. You said you would bring about an end to the war in Ukraine. And now, these are your demands for a ceasefire, a freezing of the conflict on a North-South Korea basis with British troops policing a demilitarized zone in between them. Are you serious? Do you know the history of Russia and Britain? Have you ever heard of the Crimean War? Have you ever heard of the War of Intervention? Have you ever heard of the 108,000 British soldiers that invaded Russia to reverse the Russian Revolution between 1918 and 1922? Do you know anything about any of these things? Do you think Russia is going to allow British soldiers along the demilitarized zone between Russia and Ukraine? Are you crazy, Donald Trump? I asked this on Wednesday. And I'm genuinely telling you that I'm beginning seriously to question, if not your, then the mental health of the people you have appointed around you to advise you on these two great conflicts of our time. In Gaza, in the West Bank, in Lebanon, with Iran, and of course, the potentially existential conflict in the Ukraine. We'll be talking to a man in a minute that used to be described as the last Arab. Certainly the last Arab journalist. He'd be the first to admit that there are other Arabs and even other Arab journalists. But he's still the doyen of Arabs. He's still the doyen of Arab journalists. He's Abdel Bari Atwan, and he's up right after this short break. Stay tuned.